Blessings, good morning to you all. Today we have a day we dedicate to practice of Dhamma. So you just undertook the 8 precepts. So now you're all living like temporary monks or nuns in the monastery for a day. Probably the main thing we're practicing on this day is cultivating the quality of mindfulness, sati, clear comprehension, sampajanya, and then wisdom, panya. These 3 qualities of mind that the Buddha emphasized over and over again. Ajahn Chah called them the 3 friends who help us to do the work of letting go of the causes of stress, suffering from our minds, hearts and minds. What we call jit and jai. Jitta and jai means heart, jitta means mind. So we also took refuge in the Buddha as a teacher. So most people come to a Buddhist monastery because they have faith or they're inspired by the Buddha and his teachings. And we believe the Buddha was fully awakened or fully enlightened. So somebody who has no more stress or suffering in his life, and out of great compassion, Maha Karuna, he shared what he understood, what he knew with everyone else. Totally free, not like most things these days which cost money. He just gave the teachings freely out of pure compassion. And his teachings were very effective in that day, 2,500 years ago, right up till this day. And that's why we still remember them, we still practice them, and that's why you come here. Because these teachings of the Buddha really work. But they require some effort on our side, some practice. And that's what everybody always talks about, how to practice Buddhism in daily life, how to be mindful in daily life. Well, by doing things like this, coming on a retreat, whether it's for 1 day or 10 days or any other length of time, it's a chance to really practice in a good environment. It's a peaceful place, not too many distractions, although there's always something, but not much. So you can really get into your practice. Set aside normal activities. So even though we call this Labor Day, work day, you can set aside the normal work you do. You're not going to work today, you're not looking after your family, not shopping, not doing all these other things that you might do on a work day or a day off, but you're practicing mindfulness and listening to the Dhamma and then investigating the Dhamma. So it's a day of practice, and central to this practice is cultivating this quality of mindful awareness, bringing your attention back into your own body and mind. And when you practice mindfulness, you always have to be mindful of something. So, for example, just now we took the 8 precepts, and many of you have done that many times. You know them off by heart, what the 8 precepts are, the words, even in the Pali language, which nobody speaks anymore, but we still remember. If you chant the 8 precepts or recite them every so often, you remember them. You remember what they are because they become an object for mindfulness. And that's why we do that little ritual. Some people say, oh, boring, why do we have to chant the precepts? Well, it's simply one of those things that can help you to be mindful in your practice, and the practice begins with being mindful of what you say and what you do. And that's what the precepts are covering, your actions, your speech, to try and help you live more peacefully with the other people around and the environment, the world around you. So normally, Buddhists, we keep 5 precepts if we can, which means that we're practicing mindfulness of our 5 precepts regularly, reflecting on them, reminding ourselves of them, keeping them in mind. Because as we know, we lose mindfulness very easily. So you forget when the fly or the mosquito or the ant stings you, it hurts. So your first reaction is squash it. But if you practice mindfulness of the precepts, before you squash it, you might have the thought, oh, it's alive, it's a living creature. It doesn't want to die, even though it's annoying. I'll let it go. You might call that letting go on the outside. You let go of that movement of the hand that would squash the fly or the ant. And you give it its own freedom, even though it's annoying, maybe it's taking your blood, whatever, hurting you. It's not a big pain, so you let it go. You're giving it the gift of life. You're in a position you could squash it, but you don't. You give it space, give it safety. So you're practicing abhayadana, a very great gift to the world when you can give safety, you forgive the little creature that was hurting you, and you give it safety rather than killing it. But that comes about because you're mindful of your precept. But these qualities, mindfulness, wisdom, effort, they all work together. So sometimes people say, oh, we practice sila first, then we meditate to bring up the mindfulness, then we'll develop wisdom, insight. Actually, just to keep precepts takes some wisdom, doesn't it? You need to think about it. Why is it worth practicing precepts and being mindful of precepts? Well, because when you keep the precepts, you're training your mind to give up or let go of those more extreme negative intentions, such as the intention to kill, intention to steal, and so on. You have to give those intentions up, so you're already training your mind to let go of more negative mind states that cause suffering. So you're helping your practice, and to see that requires some wisdom. So actually keeping precepts requires wisdom, so wisdom comes first. Some people say, oh, you only gain wisdom when you practice for a long time. Maybe they look at a monk and they say, oh, monks live in the forest and they become very wise. But if you decide to follow the 5 precepts and become mindful of the 5 precepts, best of all is every day, you're wise already. That is wisdom, because it will keep you from making bad karma, causing suffering to yourself and others through your actions. So this is where we begin our mindfulness practice. We undertake to keep the precepts, and if you maybe you do that chant from time to time, Pānāti Pātā Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyāmi. You might say it's boring, but it keeps reminding you, so it keeps it in mind. And that's how mindfulness improves, by keeping things in mind, not forgetting. Much of our suffering in life and stress comes about when we are not very mindful and we, without realizing, do things or hold on to states of mind, thoughts and feelings and emotions that bring us suffering, bring us stress. Because we're not aware, we're not mindful of what we're doing. Often it's just out of habit. So say like you come into the monastery for the first time, your previous habit may be just every time you have a bug on you, you squash it. No questions asked, you just squash the fly, the mosquito, stamp on the ant. It's just automatic. But as soon as you introduce the precepts, then you start questioning your actions, looking a bit more closely. You say, oh, if I follow this intention, my mind is not so peaceful. Because if you look very carefully when you're more mindful, you'll notice that intention is unskillful, unwholesome. It brings with it a little bit of pain. If it's a small thing, it's maybe just a small bit of pain. You don't feel much when you have the thought to kill an ant. But if it's something bigger, you probably feel a lot more pain. You'd have more doubt, more worry, more fear maybe. The bigger the creature, the more the suffering. But whether it's a small creature or a big one, as you look at your actions, you observe, you notice that some things we do are causing ourselves pain. Then it may lead you to say, oh, I want to change this, do it differently. And that brings you to the precepts. Oh, from here on, I'm not going to kill. So you have to look for another way to solve this problem of the fly landing on you or the ant biting your toe. So sometimes you just avoid the problem in the first place, walk around the ant or put some repellent on to discourage the flies. Other times you have to be more resourceful. The fly is already on you or the mosquito's there, but rather than killing it, you have to brush it away or blow it away, turn a fan on if you're lucky enough to have a fan. You look for another way to deal with the problem but without killing, and that way you protect your own peace of mind. You're not harming your mind and you're not harming that creature. So once you've understood this point, then you remember, oh, I don't kill. Because you've thought it through, you've decided I'm not going to kill. So that becomes a precept in your mind. So every time you're in a situation where the fly lands, either you don't even think of killing it in the first place, or if you do think I'm going to squash it, another voice comes up in your mind saying, no, I won't squash it, I'll do something else. I'll brush it away or I'll ignore it or whatever. Same with our speech. We all have problems. We say too many negative things, we complain, we swear, we say things that hurt the people around us. It's the same thing. Once you pause and start considering the results of your actions or your speech, you might notice, oh, when you say something very negative, that you tell a story about another person that may be true, but it's very negative, just criticizing them, finding fault with them maybe. Your mind is not very peaceful for doing that. Your mind doesn't feel at ease the more you do it, the more uncomfortable in your own mind you feel. And of course, people listening may also feel the same. So as you become more aware and you think about it, you, just like with killing, you might get to the point where you say, I don't want to speak like this anymore. So then you start practicing the precept, not lying, not speaking in a way that causes division, causes people to dislike each other, hurt each other's feelings. So then you become mindful of your speech, and if you're talking and you notice you're starting to speak in a negative way, then you say, oh no, I'm not going to do that anymore. So if you're really mindful, you might catch it before you even said the thing. You can see the thought in your mind saying, no, I'm not going to say this. If you're not that mindful, then you might start saying it, but you decide to stop midway. So we can become mindful at any moment, in a conversation, before a conversation, after a conversation, if so be it. You learn to bring up mindfulness, and little by little, that becomes the cause for being mindful more and more. If you've been mindful before, you can be mindful again. So this is why part of the practice involves repetition. You keep remembering the precepts, keeping them in mind, and then you repeat them, keeping them over and over again. And you become mindful of them, and they just naturally change the way you think, the way you act. So the Buddhist practice is based on this idea that as human beings we can change ourselves, we can improve, we can change ourselves for the better. Nothing is fixed, nothing is like determined, I'm always going to be like this, or my life is always going to be like this. That's a thought you might have, but it's just a thought, and it may be an incorrect thought. It's just a point of view. But the Buddha, in his wisdom, he understood that we can change for the better, but we have to make the effort, and he gave us the method to do that through our practice. So that's what we're doing here. You could say, I'm going to the monastery to make a change for the better, to improve. And the quality of mindfulness is one quality that will really help. That's why we practice it. And then the quality of wisdom, what we call wise reflection. The technical term, yoniso manasikara. Paying attention and reflecting and trying to understand things because you're mindful, then you can look and understand the way things are. You can see cause and effect. So the Buddha emphasized that if you really want to progress in mindfulness practice, begin with precepts and just learning to live in a way where you don't hurt or harm yourself or other people. And if you come to meditate like we're doing today, the next thing you'll learn is how valuable the precepts are for supporting meditation. Because when you come to train your mind in a more refined way, say to be mindful of a single object like the breath, you realize that those 5 precepts help you and have helped you get to this point and help you to have a clearer mind. Because when you come to train in, say, mindfulness of breathing, which is a very useful way to develop mindfulness, what comes up in your mind? First of all, it tends to be all the precepts you've broken. So many people complain, I meditate and I have all these feelings of guilt or regret over things I've said and done because I can remember them. They come up. if you've had an argument with someone recently, almost certainly when you meditate today, you'll remember that, because it will come up. Bad feeling, any kind of dispute, conflict, argument, you'll remember it. If you said something that was not true, you'll remember it. Said something that's unkind, cruel, you'll remember it. If you did kill something, say you're in the monastery today and you kill some bugs, you'll remember that. You know, the precepts tend to pop into your mind when you break them. They tend to come up as you start to meditate, because they agitate the mind when you don't keep them. And you have visual images or memories, unpleasant feelings and thoughts that come into your mind. But in the same way, if you've generally been keeping the precepts, when you come to meditate, your mind becomes steady and calms down quite quickly. Even if you're not totally peaceful, you still have thoughts coming and going. There won't be any strong feelings of regret, agitation, sadness, if you've been following the precepts. So most people find this is the first thing they learn as they meditate. It's actually, they learn how important the precepts are, because you see the suffering that comes when you don't follow the precepts. The mental agitation, the bad memories, the regret. And if you have been keeping the precepts, you've already trained in mindfulness on one level. You're more mindful of your speech, your actions. So when you come to practice a mindfulness of breathing as a meditation, you already have some of the qualities you need to do that. Of course, your mind won't settle down immediately. You have thoughts coming up, random thoughts, silly thoughts, wise thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts, thoughts about work, thoughts about family, thoughts about relationships, thoughts about health, thoughts about the world. You know, we can have thousands of thoughts every day. But if you're fairly at ease and at peace with yourself from having kept the precepts, that will help as you're coming to look at your own mind and bring up the mindfulness with the breathing. So the Buddha encouraged us to move on from the precepts, to incorporate them in our daily life. So when you say, what do Buddhists do in daily life, how do you practice? Begin with the precepts, but then to develop an object of meditation on a regular basis. Even if it's only for a short period every day, or for a day like this, meditation day, we can begin maybe with the breathing meditation. So just like the precepts, you're learning to keep the breath in mind, to remember to be mindful of the breath, not to forget your breath. And at first that's really difficult, because we normally are not mindful of our breath. We're mindful of our phone or our friend as we talk, or driving, or working, or cooking, or eating, or all the things we do. And we're not really mindful, we're just letting our mind run with the different thoughts and desires that come up with all those different activities. When you come into the monastery to practice sitting and walking meditation, you're just giving your mind a very simple task to turn and pay attention to the in-breath, the out-breath. It doesn't want to do that, because it's so used to all this mental activity, thinking and worrying. At first, it would rather do that. You'd rather be stressed than peaceful. And if we're honest, and you ask yourself, why do I get stressed? It's because you like being stressed. You want to be stressed because you've done it before. You might call it a bad habit. Why do we get angry? Because we like getting angry. Why do we have worry? Because we like being worried. When I say like, what I mean is just your inclination, your habit is to do that because you've done it before, you do it again. So even when you're meditating, sitting very quietly here, some of your thoughts come up and they make you feel angry or worried, or you have fantasies and desires about things you want. Even though you're just sitting still in a quiet hall, in a quiet forest, your mind does that out of habit. So even though I give the instruction, I say, be mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath, and you do that for a few moments, then the next thing in the mind goes to the next thought, doesn't it? Gets caught into another thought about work, about people, about this and that. So that's the challenge. Learning to be very patient with that fact that the mind loves to think. Some good thoughts, some not good thoughts. Some useful thoughts, a lot of not very useful thoughts. And then as you thinking a lot, that uses up mental energy. And the next thing you find is you're falling asleep. Partly because you're not used to being with the breathing yet. You haven't really become fully mindful of the breath, so the mind doesn't know where to sit, what to hold on to. Like they say, the mind, it's a bit like when you have a bad leg and you need a crutch or a walking stick to walk on, to lean on. You can't walk, normally you can't put your weight on your feet because you've got a bad leg injury or something. Your mind is like that, it always needs to lean on something. And the breath is a very subtle thing to lean on. You can, when you train yourself in mindfulness, you can just stay with the breath. And you make the breath center to your mind. And it keeps you awake, makes you peaceful, makes you happy, you enjoy it. But that comes through practice. At first, you try to stay with the breath, you can't. So your mind looks for some other object to lean on. So you go back to thinking about work and family and entertainment and what you want to do. So you have to be very patient and stick with it. And you'll find when you're sitting here with other people, you can, because you see other people doing it, then you can do it. But one of the things that will help is continuity of effort, to keep trying. So you need the patience, and you have to remind yourself, don't give up, don't give in, just keep working with it. So if you're following the breathing, you have to pick a point, maybe one single point, either at the tip of your nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. So you can experiment until you find a spot that's comfortable, and then keep bringing your attention back to that spot, meaning keeping it in mind, being mindful of the breath at that one place. So you're knowing the breath going in, and you're knowing the breath going out. And every time your mind wanders away, you bring it back to that place. Sometimes you have to be firm, tell yourself, don't think those thoughts, waste of time, cut it out. Other times you have to be gentle. Just gently remind yourself, just go back to the breath, it's all right. You don't need to solve the world's problems, you don't need to have to analyze everything. You don't need to map out your next 5 years of your life while you're sitting here meditating. You don't need to do any of those things. So you gently remind yourself, come back to the breath. Come back to the breath, be patient with any feelings of pain in your body, feelings of agitation in your mind, all the things that distract us, external things, sounds, what other people are doing. Keep coming back to your own breath. And that's part of the practice, is learning how to bring attention back to the breath and not get fed up with it, because it can be quite challenging. But if you trust in the Buddha and his teachings, trust in the teachers such as Ajahn Chah, what you find is you can bring the mind back to the breath and it starts to stay there. You keep the breath in mind, you become more mindful of it, more and more. You don't forget the breath so much and you actually let go of all the other stuff. And when that happens, you feel much better. Your mind feels more calm, relaxed. Body feels more relaxed, more at ease. And you have this fullness of body and mind. In Thai, they have the saying im. And you can use the word im for meaning fullness from eating enough food, but also it means fullness of mind. Because if you become more and more mindful of the breathing and less thinking about other stuff, your mind will feel very satisfied, content, happy. Feels full. And when you feel full, you don't need anything else. Like if you're full of food, you don't need to eat anymore. If you're full of mindfulness with the breath, you don't need to look for other things to think about or do. You feel content in the present moment with your breathing. That's the same for any meditation object. It could be the object of loving kindness or recollecting the Buddha, Buddha. The idea is to bring up this fullness as you become more mindful of the breathing. And with this fullness, you have an independence from all the other things you're normally looking at, thinking about, and caught up in. You have independence, or we say a separation or seclusion of mind. And then you're not bothered by other things because you have this inner peace, if only for a while. That's very useful to experience. You feel very calm, relaxed inside. And also you can look at things because your mind becomes steady, not distracted, not caught up in all its reactions and emotions, not falling asleep. The mind becomes more steady, then you can look at things and you can see those thoughts that normally distract you and fill your mind. You can say, oh, these thoughts are just temporary visitors to the mind. They arise, they pass away. They're not permanent. And the Buddha said what is not permanent, you can't really say is really you. You know, a thought doesn't just exist on its own. It's not a person, a being, a fixed thing. It's just a visitor to the mind. It's just a temporary mental state that arises, passes away. If you can see that, that helps you to let go. You know, this feeling I have, this emotion, this thought, it doesn't last. It arises, it ceases. What's left is this quality of knowing, the mindfulness, the wisdom. That's what's left when you see impermanence, when you see not self. We say anicca, dukkha, anatta. When you see these qualities, what's left is the knowing. So if your mindfulness is keeping the breath in mind, knowing the breath from moment to moment to moment, you feel calm, peaceful when you're doing that, then you have a real chance to see the impermanent nature of your different things, physical sensations, thoughts, memories, feelings. And this is very peaceful. When you know things are impermanent, then you also are becoming mindful of impermanence. So you become mindful of the precepts, and then mindful of your meditation object, the breath, and then you become mindful of impermanence. And when you're mindful of impermanence, anicca, aniccaṃ, means you don't forget that fact. So then when things change and feelings and moods come and go and the world around you changes, you're mindful of that. You know, oh, that's the way things are. Things are impermanent. Things come up, things go. People come, people go. The weather changes. The economy changes. The things around me change. Even my own sensations and feelings in my own body change. So in Buddhism we call this wisdom or insight, seeing the impermanent nature of body and mind and all the things in the world that we get lost in. You know, what we call the 8 worldly winds that blow us around every day. You know, we know that wherever there's gain, you gain wealth, money, material things, there'll be loss because you don't just keep things. You gain and then there's loss or decline. There's not just praise all the time, there also comes blame or criticism from other people. You don't just get status and power, you also lose that. You don't just experience pleasure all the time, you also experience pain. So the worldly dhammas, gain and loss, praise and criticism, power and status, loss of status, pleasure and pain become obvious that they're impermanent, so then you don't attach to them so much. And this is real peace, real happiness. So I'll stop talking now and we can use the last part of this session just to practice some quiet meditation. If your legs hurt, you can also practice some walking meditation outside. But until you hear the bell, we can just carry on meditating quietly. See if you can be mindful of the in-breath, the out-breath as much as you can.